So I'm back. It's been a while since I've done any modifications to the horn, but in here you can see that two of these bolts are a bit shorter. This one and this one, and this one's got a notch out of it, but that's nothing. And the reason why, it's probably hard to tell, especially relatively, but maybe if I hold this up, you can see how much more pale this wood is compared to that wood. And that's because this wood down here was fiberglassed. I did some fiberglassing, I believe, for this part in here, and I had some left over in the container, so I just pulled the brush down here and just kind of whizzed it around to cover the bottom. And unfortunately, some of the fiberglass resin got on the threads of the bolts. So now it'd be super difficult for me to remove the resin, as it's extremely hard, even with a wire brush kind of attachment to the drill. It'd be very hard, so for ages I just put off fixing these. I didn't really want to do it, so what I had is instead, it's probably on the floor somewhere, but I had these connectors on it. One of these bolts didn't actually have the nut threaded onto it, so I could only really use one pair of connectors. I couldn't use three. So what I ended up doing is I just used crimps to series the sub, and then I used these two connectors just to go around the bolts like that and tightened it. Now, it's a bit of a nuisance having voice coil 1 and voice coil 2 labelled when you can't actually use voice coil 1 and voice coil 2. Was a nuisance. While it was in the car, I only had it running off one amplifier, and the main reason why was because I only had access to one voice coil. I couldn't hook up one voice coil per amplifier, so that was just straight up wasn't an option unless I bridged two amplifiers together, which is pretty messy, and I don't have the equipment for it. And they're already bridged, and I don't think you can bridge a bridge. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that a bit more. I think I've heard some things that if you invert the phase once, then you can't invert it again, because then it just kind of cancels out, which means that the amps have, problems. So now I've got these two, I've got the angle grinder in here, and so I didn't melt anything or set anything on fire. I had the blower going at the same time, and I'd kind of chip away at it and just kind of take it off slowly but surely. From what I can tell, nothing caught on fire, because it's been about 20 hours since I did it, and unless there's a burning mountain under here, which is there's a mountain nearish where I live, which has, I believe it's got a huge amount of coal under it, and it caught fire due to lightning struck like 50,000 years ago, and it's still burning, just extremely slowly. So it's kind of funny. Or maybe that pit in the Turkmenistan, I think it is, where there's a pit with natural gas seeping through, and they set it on fire, and it's just kept burning for like 40 years. Yeah, not one of those cases, I certainly hope. But I imagine I would have noticed something by now. If it caught on fire, it's foam. It's got a really good air-fuel ratio mixture already. It would have gone up if it went at all. So I now do have, you can see I've got 4 nuts on 4 bolts. So at the very least they're threaded. I can take them off. This one was a bit of a pain in the ass to sand the tip. I had to use a grinding disc, cut-off disc and a grinding disc in order to get the kind of the beginning of the thread good enough. But I did. Also, these connectors used to actually be on the output. These used to hang out the top of the box, and I was using them to connect to the amplifier before I added a connector. For some reason, I was convincing myself I was going to be pushing 6,000 watts through this sub, but it's got no cooling, and to be honest, I'm kind of surprised it handles 2,000 watts. But it's not really complained at all yet, so I'm just going to connect it. These thick cables, though, they're 8 gauge, which is rated at 50 amp. 50 amp will be plenty for this in series or parallel. And you can see right here, this is the hole where the connector, where the wires used to go through. But now I've got this big cluster of, once again, 8 gauge. And just to make it clear, 8 gauge is, whoops, making a mess. 8 gauge is about the thickness of, this is a 10 amp 240 volt extension cord, which is 2400 watts. And you can see it's roughly the same size. So this is the same thickness as Australian extension leads. I imagine American extension leads are a bit thicker because they're dealing with 20 amp at lower voltage. But yeah, that's what we've got, and this is really hard. Even with all this kind of open area down here, it's still really tight in the turns. I don't really want to touch it. These are all soldered on, and I think I did a reasonably good job with the solder bit. You can see at least right there. Come on, focus. Come on. Yeah, you can see right there it's pulling back and it's quite stressed on the connector. So I'm going to have to plug it in and test it in order to ensure that there's no hairline fractures which are resistive or anything. So now I've got to lift the sub over, and yeah, God, in the past few days I've done a ton of soldering thick leads, and soldering thick leads with a 20-watt soldering iron, not easy. It's got a turbo button that goes up to 130 watts, but not easy. And yeah, you can see that these are some pretty chunky looking solders, but they work. They're pretty strong, so that's good enough, as long as it's strong. So now what I've got to do with this sub is I've got to lift it over here. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned, on there, I can't hold the phone too close to the magnet, it'll turn off, but that's a 4-pole SpeakOn connector, so I can do one voice coil per thing, and with somewhere I've already made a lead, which when I plug it in series the voice coils and connects it into a lead that goes to just 2 wires, which goes to the back of the crown amp over there. Another thing I don't think I've mentioned in a previous video is how I fasten the sub into the box. So you can see it sitting down right there, screw holes are lined up. That was surprisingly easy. I've had a lot of difficulty putting that sub in before, but I think since I last put it in I've become a bit stronger. That was about 6 months ago now, and since then I've been working out quite a bit, so made it a lot easier. I could just lower it in rather than kind of drop it in precariously, so that's good. But one of the things I don't know if I've mentioned is the fastening method. I use in it, take 8 screw holes, and I use 8 screws like these. These are, I'm not sure their length. I don't have the packaging for them anywhere. Also, there's part of the old sub. This was the sub that blew. That's the coil. These are approximately, well, 37 mil. Maybe you could call them 40 to the top of the head. Could hold it down a bit further, which is what, about 1.5 inches more or less. Pretty well 1.5 inches exactly for the thread length. So they're not super long. They're not like decking screws, which I've seen people use, but they've got a really, well, come on, focus. They've got a pretty coarse thread on them, and they've got a nice chunky head. So I don't need to use washers or anything. I don't want to use washers, as thin washers could cut in this around, things like that. These ones, though, they do have the chunky Phillips head. I'm not sure what variant it is, but you can see it's kind of dished in the bottom, not pointy. And yeah, here, if it does focus, if I hold it up to the black background, yeah, here you can see the difference between a regular Phillips head, the one marked Irwin, and this kind of chunkier one. You can see the tip, focus. Come on. You can see the tip's a lot less pointy, a lot more snubby. Also, that mark there came from a hammer when I was trying to do some port flaring for this box right here. Stupid. I'm not sure exactly the benefits or disadvantages between either the screw types. I know that these screws can be undone with a regular Phillips head, as I did it before. I don't have too many of these snub nose kind of Phillips bits, as they're not very common, but you can see yep, it holds in quite well. Possibly an advantage. It is also a chunkier tip, so I suppose it's less likely to cam out or torque out or snap else. And two, I've got it in this wicked long extension bit here. See the length of that? Because the longest extension bit I've got, that's a regular magnet type one, this one's like an Allen key clamp one, is only about 4 centimeters, and that's not enough to get the drill down. It's just barely not enough to get the drill down around these back areas here. At the front it's not too bad, but at the back and around the sides, because this is essentially a super recessed driver. What, 70 mil about recessed? Yep, 70 mil pretty accurately. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass to mount it. So I'm going to whiz these screws in now, and then it'll be back to playing. I could take it up to the house and remount it and everything. I don't think I'm going to do it because I want to run it at least once down here, and the effort to put it in, take it out, put it back in is a lot less than just struggling with the trolley. I should get another trolley. In fact, I should get a few things to move speaker boxes around, as I'm starting to get a collection of quite large boxes and quite heavy boxes, not including the one in the Mazda or the transmission line in my bedroom, which is a monster. It's 8 feet tall. So yeah, I should get some things to move around. Something like, if anyone watches Steve Mead's videos and watched the 224-inch sub box build, how he had like a car which you could raise and lower, that was really cool. Love to get one of those. And a dolly to sit things on and move them around. That way too I don't need to mount wheels into the bottom of everything. So things like that'd be handy. And a proper trolley with like the inflatable rubber wheels, rather than those ones right there, which are like wheelie bin wheels. Super narrow, and I've got a gravel driveway that things like to, are quite reluctant to travel through when they've got a higher, like a 10 times higher PSI with this box and sub on the trolley than a car, 10 times higher pressure per square inch or square unit. Yeah, I'm going to put this lid on. So in case I didn't mention it before, I'll pop this into the video somewhere. You can see right there, it's connected to the amp bridged. And this is the lead I made up. Quite like this lead. Thick speaker cable. You can see SpeakOn connector right here. There it is, 4-pole. You can see the different poles in it. There's the connector, which is fairly flush. It does stick out a bit, but yeah. And you can see that there's this loop right here. This loop is to connect the voice coils together in series, as all 2 of them are present here completely. So that loop is to connect them in series, and this lead is specifically for, well, say this amp or whichever amp, but it's for connecting in series. There we go, it's connected. I really like these SpeakOn connectors. Another reason why I chose these is not just because it's 4 poles, so it lets me choose all voice coils, or because it's kind of the only real option, which is because it's better than everything else. But another reason I chose it is because these are actually, and these specifically, and I did specifically go with the name brand on this one, the Nutric ones. Yeah, see, Nutric Liechtenstein. I went with these ones with, and just to be clear, on these boxes here, focus. Come on these boxes here, I'm just going with no-name brand, kind of generic ones. A lot less plastic, a lot thinner material. I went with the proper ones because these ones are supposed to do 30 amps. This sub, being 2000 watt at 4 ohm, takes roughly 22 amps at 88 volts. So I really want high current handling through the connector, or 22 amps per coil. So if it were in parallel, it'd be 44 amps at 44 volts or thereabouts. I think it might even be a bit more. I know 50 volts, 50 amps is 2500 watts. So yeah, in a 1 ohm. It's very nice. It's got a good click to it. And also I wouldn't mind converting all my speakers to SpeakOn as the raised speakers of SpeakOn. I added SpeakOn to these ones. That cabinet back there, it's an old cabinet, but it received a SpeakOn. This amp here's a SpeakOn. Honestly, it's a lot easier than mucking around with bare wires and terminals and anything else like that. Even I'm not a fan of the 6.3mm cable, as when you plug it in and take it out, it shorts out, and you might think, okay, I just won't have the amp on or plugged in while setting it up or taking it apart. But next thing you know, you've set your speakers up for mates and some chick trips over the lead and it pulls and shorts out and you think, oh no, my amp, oh god. The amp survived, but yeah. 6.3, they pull out, they short out, no good. XLR is decent too, but one thing I don't like about XLR is it's also a standard connector for signal, and if you're not looking or you're not familiar with an amplifier or something, for example, the black rack mount amp that I used to run the horn off, the bloody 20 kilo thing, which does less than a third of the power of this thing, which is 5 kilos. That thing on the back of it, it's got XLR. This is what the speaker output cable on it looks like. This is what the signal input cable on it looks like. Although obviously not as thick, it's coaxial. But you can imagine on the back of the amplifier, because the inputs look like this and the outputs look like this, and it's got a kind of a signal bridge in it so you can loop the signal to the next amplifier. One time I connected the speaker and stupid phone. One time I connected the speaker cable instead of on this side of the connector, which is what it should have been, on this side of the connector. And what that meant was instead of the amplifier running the speakers, it was actually the preamp running the speakers, the preamp running 4 ohms, and I could potentially break the preamp running that, and I don't want to do it, so I really like the idea of separating the standard for signal cable from the standard for speaker level voltage and impedance cable. That too, but what was I going to say? Yeah, it just makes it a lot less hassle. And I have seen two cables, like line level cables, which were really tough, high quality cables, so are actually thicker than some of the speaker voltage and current cables, so it's easy to make mistakes, and it's a lot harder to make mistakes when the plugs just don't fit in the wrong way, they don't fit into the wrong place. So that's why I'm going to be going SpeakOn from now on. Plus also for a while now I've had these SpeakOn to SpeakOn extension cables like these. One annoying thing about SpeakOn, which I'll address just quickly, is that all the amplifiers and the boxes have female connectors and all of the leads have male connectors. And what that means is, say here I had 2 horns and 2 amps like this banked right next to each other, and I thought, alright, plug this cable in here, and then for some reason, instead of plugging the end of this cable into the horn, I plugged it into the unit beside it. Then I'd be powering an amplifier with an amplifier, and the horn would be connected to another horn. That's one gripe I've got for them, which is I do like the idea of a problem Power Chord solved ages ago, which is male and female connectors. The supplier of voltage always has a female and the acceptor always has a male, which means that nothing's ever feeding into the wrong spot. That's good. I'd like to see that, but I can understand why they want a flush mount socket there and a flush mount socket there, and they don't really want anything sticking out as it could get broken off, even though this already has things sticking out. Anyway, other than that, these connectors pretty well kick everything else's ass. It's way better. High current, high voltage. In fact, these even advertise don't use them as 240 volt sockets, because they can handle way more power than standard 240 volt 10 amp sockets. They can do 240 volt 40 amp, which is almost 10,000 watts. Very tempting for running some household gear off, like even just like high current two-phase stuff that, you know, you shouldn't. Very tempting. Anyway, thanks for watching. I think I'm just going to upload this video as it is a bit of a talky video, because I haven't put out a video in a while on the horn, and I thought I'd just like to put out this one and see what you all think. This is also, I think the last horn video I put out was ages ago now, so it's good to bring out one finally. Yeah, if you enjoyed, leave a like, and if you have anything to say, feel free to leave a comment. I always love getting comments, just any comment. I enjoy getting comments. If this is the first video you've watched, which wouldn't really expect it to be, maybe you've binge watched a few of my videos and haven't yet subscribed, feel free to. Ding. Alright, thanks for watching. See ya.